Now let's try to find an answer to that question. Is power, moments of power, are they transcendent moments? When power manifests itself, does that represent something divine? Because our mere existence, the fact of being creatures, it does manifest the omnipotence of God the Almighty Creator. When we see in our world around us, when we see manifestations of power, do they represent for us, when we are in awe before power, or maybe terrorized by power, fascinated by power or frightened by power, do those moments represent, strictly speaking, transcendent moments? Are they simple, necessary experiences in order to direct our soul towards God? Now, when you look in general at manifestations of power, there always is a kind of relationship with religion. When you look at cultures, the origin, for example, of sports is always a religious context. That's not just the Olympic Games. You'll find that in Africa, where wrestling matches between villages always have a religious context. And in fact, in all civilizations, sport has some connection with religion. And it's not surprising, because if you want to win, you have to train. You have to obey a trainer. You have to follow a certain master in the art of that sport. So, sport has everything to do with sacrifice, with going beyond your own limits and being helped to go beyond your own limits. So there surely is a transcendent aspect of sporting, of competing, and of winning, and even of losing, because if you lose, you have to confirm, if you're a good sportsman, that you also have the virtue of humility. And the virtue of humility is essential before God. So the loser, if he has really tried after the competition, the loser can use his loss as a way, as a moment to confirm his humility, which is extremely useful before God in adoration. Whereas the winner one day will have to be humble too one day, because somebody else is going to take the crown. He's going to be challenged, and somebody else is going to walk away with the chalice of victory or the belt of victory. So, sport events, competition, testing who is strongest, testing power relationships, trying to manifest, bring to reality the potential that people have in their sport. That all is closely related to religion, but we have to find out in what way. We can also leave the realm of game, of education, and go to the much more serious realm of warfare, which is also, war is about establishing, deciding power relationships. And there it's much more serious. It's about life itself. Who is going to die? Who is going to take the risk of dying? Who is deciding what? Here it is very serious matter about life and death. Here the unknown, if you like, is much more terrifying and for many people also much more fascinating. That's why gaming in the context of warfare is attracting so many kids, especially young men, because it is a game, but on the other hand, it's war. That's why people enjoy sometimes reenacting true battles that took place in the past. War makes man religious. Of course, there's the cliché that religion causes wars, but it's much more realistic to say it's the other way around. Wars cause man to be religious because it's about life and death, and it's about a terrifying and yet fascinating unknown aspect of our life. Now, namely, how long will we live? And can we influence that? What are our chances of survival? What role does the Almighty Creator of life play in war, which is a matter of life and death? So it's impossible to separate power relationships from religious experience. They are closely linked, but in what way? In fact, what you see is that power relationships tell us something about the language of religion, because it's about sacrifice. It's about the unknown. When we are victorious in sports, or at war, or when we lose, they are as such not really transcendent moments. But they help us to understand the language of religion. They are not simple moments where we direct, where we aim our soul, our intelligence, our will, our body at God. They are moments, rather, where we learn the language of religion. That's why sports are very important in educating the virtue of religion. It's about sacrifice, it's about being humble when you win, it's about being humble when you lose. Sport doesn't give us divine moments, but it gives us a religious language. First of all, in a game, which is sport, but then at war, which is unfortunately part of our life and will be until the end of history. War is not a game, but it does force us to be religious. We cannot survive spiritually in a war when we do not recognize a God. And in order to really survive physically, mentally, or in any other way, there must be some awareness of the existence of God. If God exists, He allows war to make them more religious. Because war is too awful, too terrifying for man to be on his own and solve his own problems. It's not surprising that God talks to the people of Israel when they are at war. He speaks to them. He comes very close in the wars of the people of Israel. And through the language of war, he educates them. He educates them to be humble and depend on God, not claim victory for themselves, but always consecrate any victory to God. And when they lose, there's an amazing phenomenon. It was unique, I would say, in history. When the Israelis, when the people of Israel lose, they never accuse their enemy. They say, we've lost. That means God is not fighting with us, which means we've done something wrong. Israel has learned from God that he's got the final word in all victories. And they have learned not to see themselves as victim. To have a victim complex is radically, totally contrary to religion. You never blame the other for your own suffering. You fight for God's glory. This is what the people of Israel learned when it was fighting, and in a way this is what we still have to do when we are fighting our war, even if it's a spiritual war, even if it's the war for reality. We try to be realistic, and we can only accuse ourselves. Am I realistic or not? It's very important to see that. But still, when I have to come back to the question, is the experience of power a religious experience? I would say no. But the experience of power relationships and dealing with them, committing yourself to some form of competition and having to labor for winning, having to train and suffer for winning, that teaches you the language of religion. And then as a Christian, when I look back at history, I see that the game of sport and the seriousness of war are very much mixed in the history of man. You still see this a little bit in the cult of hooliganism around football, about football clubs. And it is for the Christian to separate war from sport. There is a competition that is a very serious game because it teaches you the language of religion. And there is a competition that must be avoided at all costs because it's not a game. It is serious because you have to destroy your enemy, who has been created by God also. War must be avoided. So you really have to distinguish between war and sports. Sports is to be stimulated. War is to be avoided. Maybe not at all cost, because sometimes war is necessary to protect the ones you love. Let me conclude by considering that power is facilitating, but never deciding. It is never ultimately determining what must be done, what I shall do, or what the future must be. Power is facilitating. Why? Because we are created with a mind that can discover the will of God, and with a free will we are free to decide if we want to respond to God, if we want to accept His promises and help Him realize those promises in us. We need power relationships in this world. We need to adapt nature to our moral life by building bridges. We can use technology in a good way. We need political powers to protect us, but especially to facilitate us in our moral life. That's why you see that the powerful of this world have always left behind buildings that are sacred. Great cultures have left great temples and great cathedrals and great mosques. Architecture is a very important manifestation of power because it facilitates. It gives people a sacred place where they can go to be religious, to adore. The secular powers cannot force anybody to go to these places, but they leave them to the present and the future generations as a place where they can adore, a place that facilitates adoration. Great civilizations have left us great sanctuaries. Manifestations of power in sport and in architecture, they help us to be religious.
Thank you.